Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for all of your contributions. I have enormous respect for your views and your entitlement to hold them, and would be sympathetic probably with an awful lot of what I've heard this evening. However, I suppose our history as a state and as legislators has been to look for, I would espouse a just society, and that we need to legislate not necessarily for what we, even the majority, think, but for what is needed for a minority. And over the course of our history, we have legislated for divorce, we've legislated for marriage equality, for fertility treatments, we provide for fertility treatments, we've legislated for abortion. And in this room, there are people who hold very diverse views. And in the list that I've given you, I'll never need to avail of marriage equality. I'm happily married to my husband for 22 years, but I do believe that others have that right. Not all of you would agree with that. And not all of you would even recognise my marriage because my husband was divorced. So I think that as legislators, we have to separate our faith and a faith-based perspective and consider the needs of the minority who would require us to care for them and to give consideration to them. So if we, so I suppose I don't necessarily have a question, merely an observation that I think tonight was this was a necessary meeting, and it was an important meeting because this is the end of life. And I don't necessarily think that there is a conflict between valuing the sanctity of life and within that sanctity valuing the right of a person to choose, when they know they are going to die, the manner and means and circumstances of that death. So I suppose that therein lies a challenge. You know, I may or may not ever choose this road, but I'm not sure that I can stand in the way of a person who feels they wish to. And I feel my duty as a legislator is to ensure that those who don't want to choose it, while it is an option for others, are safeguarded in those perspectives. So I'm not sure what there is to discuss, but I'm open to feedback and observation.
I mean, I think that's, like, we are here not to propose, in my case, Catholic doctrine onto the state. I mean, everybody here in this room is to try and together see what is the common good. And I think all of the points I would have made, yes, you know, I believe I was made by God, but you don't have to be a person of faith to understand that life, human life, whether it's the pre-Christian Hippocratic Oath, post-Christian, World Medical Association, most medical ethics associations in the world. I mean, it's not a faith thing to value human life. It's neither is it a faith thing to say, if I say I want to take my own life, and then later on I'm older and incapacitated, I say I want to take my own life, but the two responses are completely different. So that's not a faith, that's a thing that somebody can evaluate from, you know, from any perspective. It doesn't require a faith perspective. I mean, my faith feeds into it, but those things are no more than the preferential option for the poor. And Brother Kevin is obviously, he's coming from his Catholic faith, but his values are shared by society. So I think those things of equality, of the fact that what I do will have an effect. So if I decide from my autonomy that I would like to end my own life, but that affects, for instance, I think a story, I always think in these situations you have to think of your own loved ones. My father died a few years ago. He was in great health all his life. He found it very hard to find himself with cancer at the end of his days. Two very different situations. His oncologist really was out for him. He knew he was an older man and he wasn't going to live forever, but it was kind of always about a program of treatment without suggesting anything radical. And that really empowered my father. But in one ancillary element, he got another side effect. He was in another unit who obviously only saw him as an old man at the end of his life. They weren't concerned about his nutrition. They weren't concerned in a hospital in Ireland, right? And there was just an attitude of constantly bringing up DNR in a very inappropriate way, just a very different attitude, and nothing we could say changed the attitude. So just that view of putting somebody into a category where they have less dignity because they have certain conditions, that's not a religious situation. I would think that's an equality situation.
And I would condemn a situation like that around any patient. Yeah. But I don't think that there's necessarily an either or. By having an option of assisted dying doesn't mean that person wouldn't be enveloped in the care and absolutely central of their dignity right up until and including that moment where they exercise that right to know that I will die in 2 months' time, or I will, and painfully and unconsciously with pain management, yeah. Or I will choose to say goodbye to my loved ones and have an ending of my choice. And I suppose
that's where we would probably differ. I'm sorry to take all the time, but just yeah. I would say that once you introduce two different categories of people, you are actually you're putting, even if somebody who would never choose that option, they know they belong to that group of people. If I, in a moment of pain or whatever, ask for that, I won't be given that raft of care. I would think that it does affect. It categorises people into two different groups.
More witnesses now.
Sorry, I'll pipe down now.
Dr. Bruce, online there, do you want to come in briefly?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick comment about protocols and the texture of the care that is offered, the palliative care that is offered. Anecdotally, my own father was in the situation where he had a stroke and was debilitated and was in the latter stages of his life. I was in a position of refereeing a conversation between various interests in relation to his final days. And it was hugely empowering for me to encounter a registrar on the ward who was able to say, on the basis of protocols that she was implementing, a particular course of action which would have accelerated my father's demise was unethical. And I hugely admired her courage in being able to say that, but was hugely grateful for the fact that protocols based, I suppose, originally on the Liverpool care pathway were being implemented by her in a compassionate and caring way. And it gave her a framework to respond wisely and well to a family which was in distress. So I simply point out the importance of a structured set of protocols which are constantly evolving and changing and improving as technology advances and as we learn our way through this practice of palliative care. But from a pastoral point of view and being at the receiving end as a family member, I'm simply pointing out that this was a huge blessing to us. My colleague, Dr. Stevenson, Chairman, if I would like to say something about the slippery slope argument, because it's been referenced several times in the discussion. Dr. Stevenson.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add that there has been evidence and concerning evidence coming out of countries like Canada where MAID and medically assistance in dying is now being extended to people with mental health issues now coming in 2024. And there have been reports of families stating that they have loved ones who are opting into assisted death without really fully understanding what they're doing. So I think, just to echo what Reverend Bruce has said here, it's important that there's the proper protocols in place. Also, just to add, whilst we are coming here from a faith-based organisation, we are doing research, and I think whether we want to admit it or not, people of faith have impacted culture for generations, and legislators with faith have had a huge impact on cultures and have advocated for minorities. You know, you only have to think of people like William Wilberforce, who advocated for victims of modern slavery. So we're talking about changing the culture. It's not just that we're coming from a religious space, but we're coming from a space of having done the research.
With due respect, faith hasn't always influenced the behaviour of our state to the better of its people. And we have, as a member of the Children's Committee, having to deal with mother and baby and other situations, we have seen to the forefront of those unfortunate decisions over years and the hardship they caused. So I'm not sure that I buy that argument. I also didn't reference the slippery slope. The point being that we as legislators have a requirement to consider those whom we may never agree with. We may never choose the options that they are asking us to consider. You know, and that's not with regard to any of my own faith or anything like that. So I think that we need to give consideration and make sure that that view is in the room and it's not excluded. I'm
briefly going to Dr. Umar.
Senator, I actually agree with what you said, and I know where you're coming from. The Islamic perspective that I'm sharing here is not because we believe that this is what the law should be. We were asked and invited to come to share our Islamic perspective, but we believe in a pluralist approach where there should be religious freedom and when people should be entitled to have the opportunity to choose what they like. So we are in favor of choice in that sense, but we have some concerns. These are not just concerns from the Islamic perspective, but also just as, you know, general people, that our concerns are that if we legalize assisted death, there will be individuals with health issues like depression that will choose death. At the same time, this may increase pressure on people with disabilities or elderly people that may think right now we are a burden on our family, burden on the state, and this is why probably, you know, the best for me is to die. Thirdly, also, if we do legalize that, what about the healthcare system? Isn't it that somehow the healthcare system will then really invest much less in treatment, in other ways to minimize pain, and then just say, you know what, we have this option, just go, let's go for this option. So this is, you know, the perspective we're coming from. And also Muslim doctors, for example, as long as there is consensus objection, as long as that is applicable, from an Islamic perspective, we have no issue with it. So that's the main concern. So we're not here to say the state should be run by faith, or we're saying this is our perspective, but the state should be a pluralist state. It should be a state where we, you know, acknowledge and accept the diversity and also give everybody the choice to practice upon their faith and values.
I briefly want to bring in Reverend Foster. I'm sorry you've indicated for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just in regard to, I mean, I believe in church and state separation, and we don't want to get into binaries in some of these discussions about religion. I suppose when it comes to my faith, in terms of Jesus coming alongside the marginalised, that informs me about my passion for the marginalised and those who would be sidelined and easily overlooked. And so my faith, my ethical concerns, maybe are hard to separate in that sense. And the fact that Jesus did his greatest conflict was with religious leaders. So, you know, we fully acknowledge religious harm where it has obviously happened, and just that how we seek to work out our faith. I mean, in our committee, we talked this through in 2020 sort of more fully, but even as we were emailing this past week as well, I could hear the tensions, and I could, you know, and I have people close to me for whom this is just a whole lot more personal than it is to me. And so I think our faith, or my fellow Methodists or other Christians, are seeking to work out faith in a real world sense without saying that we all have the exact same views on everything. But just to underline the complexity and yet the clarity of compassion for all and how we're seeking to work it out.
Thank you, Reverend Foster.